After the first snow of winter, when you go to brush it off your car, you see all the other cars around you have been cleared. But yours is not. You turn around slowly and see a girl in a white dress standing by your car brushing the snow off. And when she turns around, her face is pale and she doesn't have an expression. But the scariest part is that it's your car and you live in a student apartment building where there is no parking. So how did she get there? Coming up next, we have suspense. You are at home alone and you hear a knock on the door. You check through the peephole and see a man in a suit holding a briefcase. He looks trustworthy, and he introduces himself as a representative from your apartment complex. He explains that there is some urgent maintenance that needs to be done in your apartment and asks if he can come in. You say yes, and he goes in without you. When you follow him into your apartment, you see that he's carrying a crowbar, and he locks the door behind him. You try to call out for help, but you realize that he's cut the phone lines. Then he turns around with a sinister smile and says, "I'm here to fix your leaky faucet." And finally, we have creepy. You move into a new apartment and start unpacking boxers. As you're getting settled, you notice that the walls seem to be closing in on you. It's only when you go into the hallway that you realize the walls are straight. When you go back into your apartment, you notice that all of your furniture is now against the walls. And as you walk towards the window, you notice that all the windows in the apartment building seem to be boarded up. You try to call out for help, but no one answers. And when you look outside, you see that all of the other apartments have lights, but yours is the only one that's dark. So which one was the scariest? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see more short videos like these, stay tuned for more content. All three of these stories are terrifying. But before we get started, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more content. Or if you want to hear more from me, check out my podcast. Links to both are in the description. And now, without further ado, here are 3 terrifying stories about the time I spent in a student apartment. No. 1. Horror. The first time I stayed at my university student apartment, I was awoken in the middle of the night to what sounded like screams in the next apartment over. Big, guttural screams. Obviously, I was freaked out, sitting in my bed, not knowing what was out there. Then I started hearing what sounded like hail for a few minutes, followed by heavy footsteps near my apartment door. I assumed that whoever was out there was just being really loud, and I didn't think much of it. The next day when I got up, I told my roommate what I had heard, and he said that he couldn't have been more right. He explained that the apartment next to ours was known for having really creepy tenants. And that particular night, the guy who lived in that apartment had apparently gotten into a massive fight with his girlfriend. Apparently they would fight every weekend, and it always ended with him screaming and yelling at her and sometimes even throwing things. My friend and I looked at each other and sighed. We knew that if we ever heard that again, we were gonna have to do something because it was unsettling to say the least. Well, one night a few weeks later, we were awoken again to the sounds of a woman screaming. My friend and I got out of bed, cautiously approached the door and listened. We heard a loud bang followed by an even louder crash. I don't think that we even hesitated. We just kind of looked at each other and I was like, "Oh, okay, let's go check this out." So we slowly opened the door and called out into the hallway. "Hey, are you okay?" When we didn't get a response, we started walking down the hallway towards the source of the noise. As we got closer, we could hear what sounded like sobs. We finally reached the end of the hallway and turned toward the apartment where all of the commotion was coming from. It was the apartment directly across from ours that was completely silent. I don't remember if we knocked or if we just opened the door, but when we did, we saw what appeared to be blood all over the walls, ceiling and floor. It was everywhere. And in the middle of it all was a young woman who looked like she had been crying. She quickly explained that she was okay and that it was just a bad dream that she had cut herself on. We didn't know whether to believe her or not, so we called campus security to be safe. When they arrived, they entered the apartment and came out with concerned looks on their faces. They told us that they were going to check in on her, which I thought was weird because if it was just a bad dream, then why would campus security need to check in on her? Anyway, that was the last that we ever saw of her. A few days later, though, some of the students were talking about how the girl had apparently taken her own life in that apartment. While we were relieved that it wasn't something more sinister, it definitely was unsettling to know that we had been so close to something like that happening. And despite the fact that the school year had already started, somehow no one had thought to tell us that our neighbor was a known cutter and apparently a severe depressive. Safe to say we never slept soundly in that apartment again. Number 2. Suspense. So after that incident, My friend and I decided that we needed to take some extra precautions. In addition to the usual safety measures like locking our doors and keeping our windows closed while we were sleeping, we also bought a personal alarm system that we could trigger with the push of a button. The way it worked was that if we were ever to be attacked in our apartment, we could sound the alarm and it would alert campus security and the police. One night we were awoken to what sounded like someone trying to break into our apartment. Naturally, we were scared out of our minds, because we had no idea who or what was out there. I do not remember if my friend or I sounded the alarm, or if we were too scared to. But what I do remember is that we were sitting there listening intently, straining to hear anything over the sound of our own breathing. We heard what sounded like footsteps outside of our door, followed by what we could only assume was the doorknob jiggling. My friend and I started screaming at the top of our lungs, which resulted in the commotion outside of the door to stop. Maybe it was just our imaginations, but it sounded like we heard a voice on the other side saying, "Let me in, please." We continued screaming until we heard footsteps moving away from our apartment door. We waited a full 10 minutes before we finally agreed to turn on our lights. And when we did, we found the creepiest thing. Someone had written "Let me in" on our whiteboard. My friend and I looked at each other, panicked, thinking that maybe the person who had written it was still out there waiting for us to go to sleep again, so that they could try to break in. Needless to say, we didn't sleep very well that night. No. 3. Creepy. One night I was awoken in the middle of the night to what sounded like whispers in the apartment next to mine. I assumed that it was just my imagination, because I had been reading Stephen King's The Shining prior to that night. But then I started hearing what sounded like footsteps near my apartment. I told myself that it was probably just my roommate getting back from the bathroom. But then I started hearing what sounded like whispers coming from inside my closet. That's when I knew that I had to get out of that apartment. I didn't even bother turning on the lights because I was too scared. Instead, I grabbed my phone and ran as fast as I could to my friend's apartment down the hall. I banged on his door and he quickly opened it with a confused look on his face. I explained what was happening and he didn't believe me. He thought that I was joking around, because I was known to be a bit of a prankster. However, when I started describing the footsteps that I had heard, he finally agreed to come with me to check it out. When we walked into my apartment, he noticed a faint scratching sound coming from inside my closet. And when we opened it, we found a small kitten that had gotten stuck in the back. It was so tiny that we couldn't have heard it if we had you and Bean sitting right in front of the closet. It was also a full-grown cat, which made us wonder where its mother was. And that is when we noticed a small opening near the top of the closet, where a wire had become detached from the frame and was creating a small hole. It was big enough for a small animal to crawl through. We immediately called animal control, and they came and trapped the mother cat and the kitten. After that, we made sure to keep our doors and windows closed at all times.